All right, we're going to evaluate Lovie Smith as a defensive coordinator. We've already talked this week about Lovie Smith potentially being one and done. Let's pretend, though, that Lovie Smith is back for another year, which I'm fine with. I can completely understand if the Texans want to run it back with Lovie Smith. But the question I have is this, and Lovie Smith asked for this himself. He asked for us to focus on what's going on the field. And he didn't want to talk about Davis Mills, and, he wants to give keys to life, and he wants to tell people what they can and can't talk about and what matters and what shouldn't. So let's just focus on what's going on the field with Lovie Smith. They have one of the worst defenses in the NFL right now. The Houston Texans have one of the worst defenses in the NFL. They're giving up the most rushing yards in the NFL, and they've struggled. And really, the defenses look bad since Lovie Smith has taken over. Now, you can say, and you would be right, that the personnel's not great, the front seven's terrible, and Bill Belichick wouldn't be able to make this a top-notch defense. I would agree with that. But I would also say that we've seen Lovie Smith coach defense for a long, long time, and we've seen him as a head coach for a decade and a half now. And if you look at what Lovie Smith's defenses have been for the majority of his time, especially when he's overseeing them, they leave a lot to be desired. Specifically in Chicago, in his first few years. In Lovie's first 3 years in Chicago, Ron Rivera, who is the coach of the Washington Commanders, Ron Rivera was his defensive coordinator. And in those 3 seasons, from 04 to 06, Chicago ranked 13th, 1st, and 3rd in points allowed per game. It's the best 3-year stretch of defense in Lovie Smith's entire head coaching career. 13th, 1st, and 3rd. They went to a Super Bowl. All the time that you hear about, well, Lovie Smith went to a Super Bowl with Rex Grossman, and Lovie Smith went to a Super Bowl. He went to a Super Bowl with Ron Rivera calling the defense. The 3 years after that, when Rivera left, the Texans were 16th, 16th, and 21st. Not the Texans, the Bears, Lovie's Bears. They were 16th, 16th, and 21st. So there was a clear fall off. And many people in Chicago, if you talk to people in Chicago, they insist that the reason Ron Rivera was let go was because Lovie looked at him as a threat. And Lovie looked at him as a potential replacement. So Lovie decided to bring in his guy. And many people felt it was his right to bring in that guy because he was coming off of a Super Bowl, and the defense completely plummeted. It wasn't until Rod Marinelli was brought in, another respected defensive mind, that the defense went back up to 4th, 14th, and 3rd. So just to reset those numbers, with Ron Rivera, 13th, 1st, and 3rd. Then Lovie Smith brings in his guy, 16, 16, 21, Rod Marinelli. And this was a survival move because obviously when you're 16, 16, and 21, Lovie had to survive. He brings in Rod Marinelli as defensive coordinator, 4th, 14th, and 3rd. So the 6 years of Lovie Smith's best defense, he had Ron Rivera for 3. He had Rod Marinelli for 3. And the 3 in which he had his guy and he was calling the shots, the defense was 16, 16, and 21. So bottom half of the league. That's where they were at. And then we saw what happened in Tampa Bay. Not good defense. We saw what happened at Illinois. Not good defense. We've seen what's happened here in Houston. Not good defense. Again, not good personnel, but it's not like we're talking about a first-year guy or something like that. It's Lovie Smith's defense. And I wonder if Lovie Smith is going to be back. Should Lovie Smith bringing on a new defensive coordinator, should that be part of the thing? And not someone that he chooses, that someone that the organization chooses. Because I know he would probably like to just make his son defensive coordinator. We saw what happened in Chicago when he got to bring in his own guy those 3 years after Ron Rivera. I just don't think that would be the ideal scenario. So if he comes back, defensive coordinator, we'll get into the double standard I think there is when we talk about things like this with offensive-minded coaches compared to defensive-minded coaches. But first, let's hear from Lovie Smith. Let's hear what Lovie Smith said when he was asked about his fallout with Ron Rivera, who oversaw the best display of defense Lovie Smith has ever put out there as a head coach?
Good football player, good football coach, good fundamental coach. This teams are gonna play a certain way. We have a similar philosophy on how to win football games. So I know how he's leading his team, and you see them playing that way. The emphasis that they place on their defensive line, I mean, you kind of have to start there. And they have not just given talk to that. They've, with picks and things like that, pretty impressive as you look of how they're building their team. Emphasis on the running game, on the offensive side of the football. So we know each other. I mean, when you work with someone, and Chris Harris, their secondary coach, I coached in Chicago too, so know a little bit. Scott Turner's doing a heck of a job. A little history with the Turners too, so a lot of things we know about each other.
I understand football is a business. Did you ever have to smooth anything over with him over the years since having to part ways with him, or were y'all just
most people don't live in the past. I don't assume you don't either. Things happen in football, you kind of move on.
I don't live in the past. I'm assuming you don't either. Well, it's not really the past because you're facing Ron Rivera. So I think that was a good question by J.A. And J.A.'s got a Charlotte background, so he's very familiar with and Jonathan Alexander of the Houston Chronicles, who I'm talking about when I say J.A. I shouldn't assume that you all know that. But he's from Carolina, so he's pretty familiar with Ron Rivera, and he knows about all of those types of things. I'll get to the comments in a sec. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And I appreciate all you for riding along. But I do want to talk about, just kind of I don't think it's a double standard. I said the word double standard. That sounds a little bit dramatic, which I've been known to be guilty as charged. By the way, Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610. But if Lovie Smith were an offensive coach, I think there would be more dialogue about, okay, maybe this guy can be a head coach, but he needs to kind of be a walk-around guy, like he was when Ron Rivera was in charge of the defense when it was at its best. And, like he was to a certain point when Rod Marinelli kind of bailed him out and saved him from getting fired in Chicago, and he came and oversaw the defense. If Lovie were an offensive guy, I think there's kind of like an offensive bias, which might also be a dramatic word. But there's like an offensive bias, and football fans are naturally offensive minded when it comes to criticism, because we talk about the quarterback all the time, and rightfully so. But whenever there's a coach struggling and he also happens to be an offensive coordinator and his offense is struggling, immediately it's, well, should this guy be calling plays? Why is this guy calling plays? He needs someone else to call offense. We did it with Bill O'Brien. Teams do it all the time. And we've talked a lot about Pep Hamilton, and I think Pep Hamilton has struggled. He has the same personnel issues that Lovie does, but Pep Hamilton has struggled. But you don't really often hear, and maybe here or there, it's either Lovie needs to go or they need a new offensive coordinator. We don't necessarily talk about, this guy needs a new defensive coordinator and someone else needs to call the defense. I think that's the case with Lovie Smith. And if he were an offensive guy, there's no doubt that dialogue would be had. If whether or not Lovie Smith is back next year, and I got a column, and I also have a video if you want to go back and look at the video about Lovie potentially being one and done. Whether he's one and done or not, I don't feel 100% like pound on the table passionate about. Although I do think there's a case to be made that maybe he should be, because we never looked at him as the long-term guy. But if he is back, I don't think it's debatable. I do think he should have a defensive coordinator. And that doesn't mean that he doesn't have anything to do with the defense, but just like in Chicago, his 6 most successful years when he had, a established good defensive coordinator, I do think if Lovie Smith's going to be back, he needs to have a defensive coordinator. And the proof is really in the pudding. We have a large body of work. We have a large sample size of why that's the case. And I think that's very, very fair. And if he were an offensive coach, I think we would already be having that type of discussion. I do also kind of think it's a little bit, I don't want to say troubling, but when a guy goes to a Super Bowl and he gets rid of a defensive coordinator just because he feels he's threatened to him, it makes me kind of like think about Bill O'Brien and how Bill O'Brien would always hire offensive staff of guys that he didn't feel threatened by. He would go get John Perry, who was a receivers coach at Brown when he was there, to be a tight ends or receivers coach. He would get Tim Kelly, who followed him around for 8 years, to call plays. Mike Devlin, who, I mean, he should be an assistant O-line coach like he is right now. He would go get him because he didn't feel threatened by him. I do kind of like say, damn, so you couldn't get along with Ron Rivera because he was a threat to you when you were making the Super Bowl because of your defense? We see the pettiness when things are bad. I always just wonder about that, with Lovie Smith. Is the pettiness just a thing that happens no matter what? I'll get to the comments here. Shout out to all of you for the comments. Kobe Tree says, what's up? He asks, I believe the Browns pick at the end of the day will be top 5. If that happens, that'll be fantastic because you'd be looking at a quarterback and a defensive player, whether it be Bryce Young and Will Anderson, Bryce Young and Jalen Carter, who knows? That would be freaking fantastic. Or you could be looking at Bryce Young and an elite receiver. That would be great. Brown Chubby Bear, king of Texans Reddit, king of Texans dialogue. He's got his podcast too. I think they had Vandy on, so what's up to him? What do you think of Mills' criticism of the conservative play calling? I agree. I mean, I do think it's conservative. I think they've protected Davis Mills almost at a weird level, almost at an extreme level. I do wonder though, and I know it's easy to criticize Pep Hamilton. I do strongly wonder if maybe this is kind of Lovie Smith kind of controlling the way the offense is called too, if this is kind of what he's asking for. Because when a defensive coach comes out and says, I want to run the ball and I want to do this and I want to play this style and all that, part of me does wonder, like much how Lovie Smith was threatened by Ron Rivera and ran him out of town, according to many people in Chicago and according to, context clues. I do wonder if Lovie Smith has kind of a hand in how the offense is called and how fun it is to truly call an offense around him. So it's good if Mills wants to say that. I don't think Davis Mills is a franchise quarterback, but I also wonder, like the conservative play calling, how much of a hand Lovie Smith has in that. Someone says Heupel and Hooker. Okay. Malik Hooker. That would be like a third round pick, second round pick. He is 25 years old. Who knows? Would you trade a day 2-3 pick for Derek Carr if the Raiders plan to move on from him? No, because if the Raiders want to move on from him, I think there's only like $5 million in dead money. So I think you'd be able to bring in Derek Carr no matter what. If they don't draft a quarterback, I don't see too many options better than Derek Carr as kind of a stopgap guy. So I'm not opposed to that, although I would rather have the young guy. But if we're talking about Jimmy Garoppolo and we're talking about all these stopgap guys, I would rather have Derek Carr. Kobe Tree disagrees. He'd rather have Jimmy G over Derek Carr. Hopefully we're not having that argument. Uncle John McClain said, keep Lovie, and they were bringing a new DC and OC, so why keep him? They need to bring in new young coaches, Kafka, D'Amico, someone from the Shanahan-Kubiak tree. I agree with you on that. There's some intriguing names out there, and I think this is actually a way more intriguing job. I just tuned in, but what's up with these signings? Any real talent or just depth? I don't know how big of a deal the Eno Benjamin signing is. I do know that I like it. I do know that the Chiefs, as well as the Saints, I think that's what Schefter said, put in a claim as well. And he was leading the Arizona Cardinals in yards per carry. So he can't be worse than Burkhead, can't be worse than Dare, although Dare doesn't really get very much opportunity. So I like that. The Rodgers, I don't know. But even if these guys don't work out, I like using the waivers as much as possible and trying to see if you can get some guys that can be long-term pieces or even just pieces heading into next year. So I like it. I don't think Eno can be worse than what we've seen. And I like that Caserio is making those picks. Juan says, I would hire you, Landry, for GM. If I was Cal, we'd be screwed. I almost said the F word. I think I can on YouTube, but just didn't. If I were GM, we would be screwed. I can promise you that. Although I do think that if you let me just give me a draft magazine, I might be able to draft decently. Better than Bill O'Brien for sure. But not better than Nick Caserio. I think Nick Caserio knows what he's doing. So I definitely wouldn't hire me. Appreciate everyone for listening. What do you think? I always respect the dialogue. Loopholes official Facebook page. No politics or anything on there. Just straight quality sports talk and BS like that. So request that if you want to get in. Please subscribe to the channel, spread the word. Very much appreciation. And most importantly, listen to me Monday through Friday, 10 to 2 on Sports Radio 610. Should have a player straight off the practice field tomorrow. We got a game on Sunday, and we got some good times ahead. And remember, no matter what, no matter how many 4-win seasons we have, no matter how crappy things get, we are all in this together. Have a good one.